Britain's ruling Conservative Party is on a roll. It won a majority at the recent general election, and now the Labour opposition looks set to elect as its leader a left-winger widely regarded as unelectable by the wider public. So does it matter that David Cameron, the Prime Minister, is set to step down before the next general election in 2020? One person who thinks it does is Janan Ganesh, the FT's chief political commentator. Janan, David Cameron, often seen as a bit of a lightweight, he's been blown a bit by the winds as leader of the party. Surely, in these circumstances, if Labour does elect Jeremy Corbyn, this man of the far left, then the Tories, pretty much whoever is at the head of the party, will sail through the next election.
Well, the Tories themselves seem to think that. They're pretty relaxed about Cameron's departure. The Labour Party seem to think that. If you talk to Labour MPs, a lot of them have written off the 2020 election, despite the fact Cameron is going halfway through, we expect. And I think that's completely misguided. So much in politics rests on who your party leader is, much more than other supposed fundamentals. And David Cameron is not a sensationally charismatic politician, but he is the most rounded of his generation. He's a 7 or 8 at most things, perhaps outstanding at one thing, which is temperament. And I don't think there's anyone in the Conservative Party who is obviously as good as at many things as David Cameron is.
But he's often criticised as a leader who has shown very little sense of strategic vision. And indeed, if you go back to the famous Bill Clinton mantra, it's the economy, stupid. It's other trends that politicians ride rather than leaders shape that really matters.
That is, I mean, the economy is hugely important, but you have to remember in the first 2 years of this parliament, when the economy wasn't going very well, the Tories were still basically competitive in the polls. People who expected them to be 20 points behind were surprised to see them, barely 8 or 9 points behind. And I think a huge part of that was the side-by-side comparison of the two leaders on offer. Labour's Ed Miliband at the time versus David Cameron. One of these two guys struck the public as an obvious Prime Minister and the other didn't. And that, I think, is enough to overwhelm almost anything, including something as important as the economy. Now, if there's a downturn before 2020, it wouldn't be shocking if the incumbent government suffers a bit. But I think the even bigger blow to the Conservatives would be losing someone who just radiates prime ministerialness, whatever that quality is. And you're right, he lacks a certain strategic nous. He's got himself into trouble over the years. He's about to fight an EU referendum that he didn't really want a few years ago. But it's always relative, him versus someone else. And I'm not sure the someone else the Tories have available is obviously on his level yet.
But they have George Osborne, becoming quite a commanding figure as Chancellor of the Exchequer. There are other people waiting in the wings, notably Boris Johnson, perhaps. It's not like the Tories don't have a wealth of potential candidates.
No, and they, at the moment, you'd say they have better candidates than Labour have available, if you look at the uninspired list of candidates competing for the Labour leadership. And I think George Osborne is the readiest of all the Conservative candidates you mentioned. I think he's a better, as I said in the column, he's a more technical executive than Cameron is. He understands the levers of power and how to get things done. But the test of a Prime Minister is, can you, on the same day when a disaster happens in the country and lives are lost, give a television address which captures the tone, then make 20 very dry technical policy decisions, then greet the Chilean president or the Malaysian Prime Minister, all within a few hours of each other, and be as rounded as that. And I have no trouble believing that Osborne will turn out to be that rounded, but it's not obvious at the moment because he's never done that job that he is.
So would your advice to the Tories be right now, and we are after all looking forward nearly 5 years, to hang on to Cameron, to ask him to stay on through the next election, even if Jeremy Corbyn becomes the leader of the Labour Party?
I think it's a mistake to have pre-announced his resignation in the way he did back in March, and having won a majority, being a relatively young guy, no signs of illness or stress really, he could absolutely serve out a third term. I don't think he'll renege on the commitment. I think he'll be gone, and that's a bigger problem for the Tories than any of us suspect.
He doesn't apparently have the appetite to go on.
Well, I think he never expected a majority. I think that when you don't expect a majority, when you think you're going to be in another coalition or a messy minority government, you feel obliged to say, okay, I'll check out in a few years' time. I won't go on and on. With a majority, with a relatively weak opposition, and the economy, for the time being, doing quite well, I think he may now look back and think, did I need to be as absolute in my commitment to leave as I was?
Janan, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.